Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and all of those in the United States and those here with me in our nation's capital. Good evening to those in the United Kingdom and in Europe, and hello to our viewers around the world. My name is John Rogers, and I have the privilege of serving as the chairman of the Atlantic Council, established just over 6 decades ago, when in the height of the Cold War, our founders dedicated their cause to bridging the geographic and ideological divide which separates us from our European allies in the post-Cold War era. This afternoon, I'm honored to welcome you to the 2022 Christopher J. Makins Lecture, a special Atlantic Council event in honor of the Council's former president and luminary on geopolitical affairs. The lecture series was launched to focus on a crucial pillar of the Atlantic Alliance, and one that was near and dear to Christopher Makins' heart, the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. Since the Second World War, this relationship has anchored the transatlantic alliance and has been central to the defense of our shared principles. As we convene today, however, these very principles are more than just being threatened. Rather, they are under assault, as are the foundational pillars of democracy itself. And I don't need to tell you, all of you, that as Russian President Vladimir Putin continues to escalate his brutal war against Ukraine, we are witnessing both the largest mobilization of military forces and the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe probably since the Second World War. As the Russian invasion continues, we mourn the reckless and unnecessary loss of life as Ukrainians defend their country made up of people who only want peace, stability, and the right to decide their future. We have learned from history how the perverse agenda of a few, even one individual, can wreak havoc and devastation on millions. Never has resilience and resolve been more crucial to the fight at hand and the balance of world order. Against that backdrop, we should remain crystal clear in our messaging to the world. The ideals for which Ukraine fights and the Ukrainian sacrifice, they are our principles. So in rising to this occasion and in response, we need to be strong and united. We need to be transatlantic in our view, and now more than ever. The United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, and our global allies remain unified in our opposition to tyrants who seek to reshape the international landscape in their autocratic image. And the United Kingdom continues to play an active, exemplary role in responding to this aggression, leading the change with material aid to the Ukraine and active participation in the sanctions against Russia and the Putin cabal. Today, to discuss the UK's actions and the role in the transatlantic relationship and how Britain is making the most tangible difference in this crisis, I'm honored to welcome the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom, Liz Truss, to this year's Makins Lecture. Secretary of State Truss has been a crucial advocate in organizing and cooperating with our transatlantic allies in response to this crisis, and we look forward to hearing her remarks and views after an introduction by Her Excellency Dame Karen Pierce. Madam Secretary, we want to welcome you here, and I'm sure that it hasn't escaped your notice, and I know that Dame Pierce's keen eye surely noted this to you, but you are joining us today at Decatur House, which is the home of Stephen Decatur. He's an American hero of the War of 1812. And in fact, this house was built from his prize money won in his naval engagements during this conflict, and was finished within a year of the reconstruction of the White House after it burned by a foreign power that you may be aware of. So we didn't want to let that go unnoticed here today. And as part of that, what we've arranged for you to have as a souvenir of your time here at Decatur House is we're giving you a brick from the White House that was removed in the reconstruction that happened afterwards, so you can take it back to the Foreign Office. But against the backdrop, perhaps this anecdote is apt symbol of the resiliency in the US-UK relationship, able to work through our differences and remain committed to our enduring vision and our bond. So with that, it's truly a privilege to hear from you during this pivotal time for NATO allies, our common cause, and our collective resolve. And in this moment, I'm certainly excited that Christopher Makins would have reminded all of us of the importance of the transatlantic unity, anchored by the US-UK relationship. And he would have fought tirelessly to ensure this relationship remains central in responding to the invasion of a sovereign nation and the steadfast in the years and the decades to come. Today, we honor that commitment. Christopher's life work and the spirit continues to thrive through this lecture series. And with that in mind, I would like to share a special thanks to Christopher's wife, Wendy, who is here with us, and his daughters, Tina and Marianne. They have the privilege to have you all with us here today, so thank you. Now I'd like to invite Ambassador Dame Karen Pierce to say a few words before the Foreign Secretary provides her remarks, and then later we'll join Fred Kemp, the President of the Atlantic Council, who will moderate a discussion. So thank you very much, and Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much indeed, John, for those remarks, and hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'd just like to say, in respect of Decatur House, if it weren't for the Brits, very little of this would have been possible. So I'd like you to note that, please. We are very privileged as the British Embassy to have been able to work with you and Fred and our very good friends at the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for helping pull this together. To Wendy and your family, thank you so much for being with us. It's a real honour to celebrate the memory of Christopher Makins, who was a literal Anglo-American with a parent from both countries. But as John was saying, his commitment to transatlantic friendship, to transatlantic endeavour in war and peace was absolute. And this is such a fitting moment for the world we find ourselves in right now. I wanted to say a few words, if I may, about the Makins Lectures. They have had very distinguished speakers, Dr. Henry Kissinger, Lord George Robertson, who is the head of NATO, Brent Scrowcroft, and we're really lucky today to have the Foreign Secretary come and join us. This is the Foreign Secretary's first major visit to the United States since taking up her office. She was appointed in September. She's no stranger to the US, having been the Trade Secretary, but also in an earlier incarnation, the Foreign Secretary served as our Justice Minister and also as our Chief Secretary to the Treasury. So really, she covers an enormous breadth of the US-UK relationship. So Foreign Secretary, it's an enormous pleasure to be able to welcome you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for hosting this event at this very important time. In the late 1990s, I worked for Shell, and one of my first roles was a ship refurbishment project in Norfolk, Virginia, just south of here. And I was overseeing 2 LNG vessels that had been mothballed due to lack of demand. Back then in the oil industry, we were modelling oil prices at $10 a barrel. Today, it is heading towards $200 a barrel. It feels like a different world. We thought that energy crises, expansionism, and geopolitical strife were behind us. We thought that peace and stability were inevitable, not something that we had to work and invest in. Now, those illusions have been shattered, and we are paying the price for those years of complacency. Russia built its capabilities in plain sight, violating its commitments and acting with impunity in Georgia, in Crimea, and beyond. We knew what Putin was doing. We had the intelligence, and Putin announced his designs on Ukraine in public. He set his intentions down in black and white and put them up on the Kremlin website. But it was difficult for any of us to believe. Well, we believe it now. The world has woken up, and the era of complacency is over. We must rise to this moment. We must pledge that never again will we allow such aggression to go unchecked. This means acting now. It means being tough, because we know the costs will rise if we don't. The public understand the gravity of this moment. They see the terrible suffering caused by this barbaric and illegal invasion against a European democracy, and they recognise that the world has changed. Putin has launched a full frontal assault not just on the Ukrainian people, but also on the very foundation of our societies and the rules by which we coexist: sovereignty, democracy, the UN Charter. He has shaken the architecture of global security. The invasion of Ukraine is a paradigm shift on the scale of 9/11. And how we respond today will set the pattern for this new era. If we let Putin's expansionism go unchallenged, it would send a dangerous message to would-be aggressors and authoritarians around the world, and we simply can't allow that to happen. We have to start with the principle that the only thing aggressors understand is strength. We must work together to ensure that Putin loses in Ukraine. Putin thought that his tanks would roll into Kiev at will. Instead, he has faced fierce, organised and tenacious resistance. At Hostomel Airport, in Kharkiv and Mariupol and beyond, new chapters have been written in the history of valour. I pay tribute to the bravery of the Ukrainian people and to President Zelensky's remarkable leadership. Putin also expected the world to be slow and to be divided. Instead, he's been met with a resurgence of political unity and strength. In the UN General Assembly, 141 countries voted to condemn Russia's actions. Putin's only supporters were Syria, Eritrea, Belarus, and North Korea. Never did we think that the great nation of Russia would be reduced to this. Aside from Eritrea, its only allies are now a vassal state, a rogue state, and a war criminal. Putin is shunned and isolated. He has made his country a global pariah. As things get tougher in Ukraine, we will continue to increase our support. The UK was the first European country to send lethal military aid to Ukraine, and we're a top humanitarian donor. The United States, Germany, Sweden, Finland, Poland, the EU, and others have also stepped up. Our coordinated sanctions were unprecedented, and they were overwhelming, cutting off funding for Putin's war machine and putting him under growing pressure at home. The fact is that the UK, the US, EU, Japan, and Canada moved in unison, gave this action incredible scale. It has been truly global. Even Switzerland has put aside its historic neutrality. Singapore has imposed bilateral sanctions for the first time since the 1970s. And in the United Kingdom, we put in place the toughest package of sanctions in our history, hitting over 200 individuals, entities and subsidiaries, including Putin himself. We've hit £300 billion worth of Russian bank assets, more than any other nation. And this week, we changed the law in the United Kingdom to allow us to take even tougher action against oligarchs and others around Putin. Today, we have sanctioned Roman Abramovich and other major oligarchs, showing that we will act without fear and without favour. This effort has been phenomenal and it's been united, and we've done a huge amount. But let me be clear, we are still not doing enough. We must double down and we have to ramp up the global pressure on Putin. We have to go further on sanctions to tighten the vice, including a full SWIFT ban, freezing all Russian bank assets, and encouraging more countries to join the effort. We want a situation where they can't access their funds, they can't clear their payments, their trade can't flow, their ships can't dock, and their planes can't land. And we must work together to ensure justice is done at the ICC, and Putin is held to account for his appalling actions. And we must do more to deliver defensive weapons and respond to the growing humanitarian emergency. We will do all of this, and we will shape this new global era for global security. If we are to persuade Putin and future Putins that we are serious, we need to do things differently. First of all, we must end the strategic dependence which puts our economies and security at the risk and mercy of malign actors. Europe remains deeply reliant on Russian energy. This provides a vital source of revenue for Putin, and it must end. Together with the United States, we announced that we will phase out Russian oil imports, and I welcome the EU's plan to cut its import of Russian gas by 2/3 this year. We're working with our G7 partners to cut this dependence once and for all, to put a ceiling on the percentage of Russian energy imports and committing to bring it down over time. And we need to look at how we can help those countries that is especially dependent on Russian energy and how we can increase supplies elsewhere. This will require shared commitment over time, and it will require greater energy investment in new infrastructure and for producers to be willing to export more. I applaud President Biden's commitment to release 30 million barrels from the US reserve. But we must also look at other areas of dependence. Whether it's minerals or rare earth metals, we should work to prevent future problems before they emerge. Secondly, we need to strengthen our deterrence. In the UK, we significantly increased our defence spending last year, ready for this more competitive age, recognising Russia as the most acute threat. We are NATO's biggest contributor in Europe, and we're doubling the number of UK troops in Estonia and Poland. The United States continues to lead the way on spending in NATO, and others are stepping up. We're seeing a real unity of purpose. I applaud Germany's historic decision to up its military spending. But the fact is, we all need to go further. Many countries still aren't meeting their target of spending 2% of GDP on defence. And let's be clear, that is a minimum. In the Cold War, we were spending far more, upwards of 5%. We should be ready to do whatever it takes to respond to the challenges of today and tomorrow. And we must redouble our efforts to strengthen NATO's eastern flank. We have to support non-NATO countries that could be the next target of Putin's aggressions, like our friends in the Caucasus and the Western Balkans. And we must deepen our partnerships in other areas, like AUKUS, our trilateral partnership with Australia, or our work with Canada and others to boost security in the Arctic Circle. The NATO strategic concept and the US national security strategy will be vital in pointing the way forward. We need to ensure that our global security architecture is fit for the new era. And we must lead a new global consensus where the rules are weakest, in technology, in space, and in cyberspace. And we have to reinforce and globalize our arms control regime. We don't know where the next threats may arise, and we know that conflict anywhere threatens security everywhere. Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific security are indivisible. China looms large over this debate. Beijing is increasing its assertiveness and expanding its armed forces at breakneck speed. They claim a policy of non-interference. They claim to respect sovereignty and have refused to support Russia's aggression at the UN. We want to see them follow through on those claims. Thirdly, we need to develop stronger alliances around the world. The UK is deepening our global economic, diplomatic, and security ties. And we need to see the entire free world reach out. We're rallying those 141 countries that voted to condemn Russia's actions at the UN, and we're persuading those that abstained to toughen their resolve. We need to draw more countries into the orbit of those who are prepared to stand up for sovereignty. In the past, we've neglected the strategic importance of some of these countries, including partners in the Indo-Pacific, Africa, and the Gulf. They want alternatives to working with authoritarian regimes who load their balance sheets with debt. So we have to provide an alternative through British international investment, America's initiative Build Back Better World, and other initiatives from like-minded partners. And we shouldn't let anything detract from our unity. That's why we must fix the problems of the Northern Ireland Protocol. All of the signatories of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement share a commitment to peace and stability in Northern Ireland. The UK is firmly opposed to a hard border. The Belfast Good Friday Agreement protects east-west ties as well as north-south ties. At present, however, the protocol is creating an imbalance between communities. The UK has put forward proposals to enable free trade to flow within the UK at the same time as protecting the EU's single market. Our objective is that the protocol can enjoy the support of all communities and ensure the democratic institutions of Northern Ireland can function. And we'll need increased political will on all sides to make that happen, and pragmatism from the EU. I want us all to work together to resolve our differences and to be focused on the threats that we face, the immediate threats to European stability and security. Our ultimate aim, working with all our allies, is to make the world safe for freedom and democracy. The transatlantic relationship is vital here. Britain and America have always been at the centre of European and global security, at the centre of a strong G7 with our friends in the EU, Canada, and Japan. We stand together to face down aggression around the world, from the South China Sea to Eastern Europe. President Biden and Prime Minister Johnson are seized of this task. That's why in Cornwall last year, they signed the New Atlantic Charter. They promised to renew the architecture of international cooperation for the 21st century. And they pledged to stand up for democracy, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Putin should take note. We will not rest until he fails in Ukraine and the country's sovereignty is restored. Putin must lose because the consequences if he doesn't are huge. So we will keep strengthening our response, replacing doubt with determination and complacency with conviction. We must never let our guard down again. We will be tough, not because we want conflict, but because we want to prevent it. Be tough, get peace. In this new era for global security, let that be our rallying call. Thank you.
Madam Foreign Secretary, thank you for that powerful speech and message. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and before I take on moderation, it's my honor to do so. I also want to acknowledge the Ambassador, Dan Karen Pierce. We work very closely with you and your embassy on many different fronts, and thank you so much. It's a very important relationship. And also Jan Lodel. Thank you so much. My predecessor in this job, one of Christopher's closest friends, and he launched this speaker series with Boyd and Gray and other members of the board. So thank you so much for being here. And of course, to the Makins family, always wonderful. Let me just quote one line to lead off with a question. The era of complacency is over. Then on, the invasion of Ukraine is a paradigm shift on the scale of 9/11. Important words in this country. Continuing the quote, how we respond today will set the pattern for this new era. If we let Putin's expansionism go unchallenged, it would send a dangerous message to would-be aggressors and authoritarians around the world. You outline that not enough has been done, that more needs to be done, and you spoke particularly to more on SWIFT, to more on banks, and other sanctions. Give us a feeling of how quickly you think one should do that. As you see the horrors of Ukraine, what comes next? What do you think actually addresses this in a way that Putin looks at, or the people around Putin look at, and they say, well, this needs to stop?
The effect our sanctions are having are already extremely severe on the Russian economy. I mean, we've seen, for example, the sanctions we put on the central bank have prevented the spending of foreign reserve currency. That is extremely difficult. The everyday life in Russia has completely changed back to more what it was like during the Soviet era. People are no longer able to use Apple Pay or the credit cards that they were using. Western companies like McDonald's are no longer there. So we have seen a dramatic impact of the sanctions, much more dramatic than Putin was expecting. And I think one of the issues here, and why I talk about the age of complacency, is we didn't respond strongly enough to what happened in Crimea and the Donbass. And he got a message that we weren't serious when we said there would be severe sanctions. But there is still more we can do. And the fundamental driver of the Russian economy is oil and gas. And the absolute key has to be reducing dependency on oil and gas. And I recognize many European countries are very dependent. Some have as much as 80, 90, 100% dependence on Russia. But we have to help them get off that dependence. We have to find alternatives. In the longer term, that's about nuclear and renewables. In the short term, it's about finding alternative sources. Of course, the US can be helpful with respect to LNG, the industry that I started my career in. The Japanese have also offered to send cargoes. We need to do more with the Middle East. But we need to act more now, because the sooner we get more sanctions on, the tougher it's going to get for Putin, the harder it is for him to fund his war machine. And the sanctions, together with supplying lethal aid to Ukraine, are absolutely key to enabling us to ensure that Putin loses in Ukraine. And you've asked me how quickly. Well, the G7's already working together on a package of new sanctions. We're working closely with all of our allies. As I've said, we need to encourage not just us to go deeper, but we need to encourage broader adoption of those sanctions. There's 141 countries that voted against Russia at the UN. We're encouraging all of those to adopt similar sanctions.
And it is remarkable, the notion of G7 sanctioning and freezing the central bank assets of a G20 country is unheard of. Is the logic that Putin himself says this is unbearable, I'll back off? Where do you think he goes? Is the logic that it's his own internal circle says this is enough, we've lost our yachts, we're losing our chance to go to Western schools, how does that work? Or is it an uprising in Russia? What is the end game for the sanctions? What do you think Putin's end game is, and how do they
Well, the
coincide?
primary objective of the sanctions is to debilitate the Russian economy, to stop the funding of the weaponry that is being used to destroy Ukraine. That is the fundamental objective. That's why financial services are so important. That's why oil and gas is so important. And we're also sending a message to Russia itself and the Russian people. We know that Putin has control of the state media. We know that other sources of information are being cut off. Of course, the UK has set up a new information unit. We're working with allies to communicate to the Russian people, but nevertheless, it's hard to get messages through. However, people can see what's happening when they have to queue at the bank or they can't get on to the Moscow metro because they can't use their payment mechanism. So it's also a way of communicating with the broader population exactly what is happening. So I think those factors are both extremely important, but it is the ability to degrade the Russian economy that is crucial to the sanctions.
In your speech, where you outlined or detailed less was where one gets tougher on the military side. The Biden administration made clear today that the MiG-29s probably weren't in Ukraine's future right now, that Poland was asking for. How important is it right now, as we see more atrocities coming out of Ukraine, to take further military action or military support, better said, on behalf of allies, on behalf of the UK, on behalf of the US, and what specifically ought that be?
Well, we need to do as much as possible, as early as possible, to help Ukraine in its self-defense. The UK has been supplying anti-tank weapons for some time. We're now supplying anti-aircraft weapons. We think that's the most effective way of dealing with the Russian aerial threat. We are helping Ukraine on the basis of their right to self-defense under the UN Charter. And within that framework, we need to do as much as we can, as early as we can. The UK has hosted a donor conference with 25 other countries. We are helping logistics of getting that equipment into Ukraine, but that is absolutely crucial. Alongside the economic sanctions, that's the other main way we have of influencing this conflict and seeking to end this conflict as early as possible. I'm very fearful that we are looking at a very long-term conflict. But what we are seeing, and I think this has exceeded expectations, particularly of Putin, is we're seeing very, very strong Ukrainian resistance. We're seeing incredible bravery from President Zelensky and right the way through Ukrainian society. And we are seeing them resist the Russian invasion. We need to do all we can to help that. And in any crisis, countries always wish they'd done more earlier. That's always the lesson of crises. And the lesson of the build-up over the last 20 years. And Putin made it very clear what his intentions were at the Munich Security Conference in 2007. But not enough attention was paid at that time. We were too complacent. We absolutely can't be complacent now. And as the United Kingdom, we are doing all we can. We encourage all of our allies to do all they can. Some countries have different equipment, can operate in a different way. Some countries are more dependent on Russian oil and gas than everybody, but we all, it is a collective effort. I think we have shown huge unity across the G7 and beyond, and we need to continue to do that.
And during your address, you made clear that the sanctions weren't yet sufficient and more needed to be done. Do you feel the same way on the military side?
Well, we are stepping up our efforts, and yes, more needs to be done. There is continual demand, and of course, those weapons are being used, so we continue to supply more, and the Ukrainians continue to need more.
The Russian information operations, this is an area where your country has been a leader. They've been constant, and they've included, and as you said, we haven't responded early enough, they've included efforts to undermine elections, deny the assassination attempt of Sergei Skripal on British soil and so much else. Now Russia has used this tactic to falsely justify the invasion of Ukraine. This time we got ahead of a lot of the information. We've done a lot better. What is the challenge now, having been such a leader globally on countering Russian disinformation? How does it change now that we're involved in a hot war?
Well, there was a lot of effort to preempt the Russian invasion and to call out the playbook in advance of the invasion. We released intelligence showing that there was an intention to create a puppet regime in Kiev. We've released information about Russian cyber attacks. We've used intelligence to expose what Putin was planning, the fact that he was planning a false flag operation to try and justify the invasion. And I think that exposing of Putin's plans and his techniques have helped us convince countries that Putin has been lying. I mean, right until the invasion, he and his colleagues are making public statements saying they had no intention to invade Ukraine. There are still public statements coming from Russia that they are not fighting a war. And this just beggars belief. I haven't spoken to a single counterpart who, in all conscience, can say the Russians are telling the truth. And one thing I think that happened at the end of the Cold War, the UK certainly disbanded its information unit. We assumed that it was over, that we were moving into a new era of peace and prosperity. Those information units were not disbanded in Moscow. And I think for a number of years we were outpaced in disinformation. We've now recreated, or we've created a new information unit across our government. We are working to communicate in various ways with the Russian population and with the wider world, and we're working with our allies across the G7 to do that. And I think that's incredibly important because as well as being a battle on the, a traditional battle, if you like, on the battlefield, this is also about information and perception. And we are being proactive. And you've asked about the next phase, what we're doing now. Well, we're calling out, these false claims about humanitarian corridors. Humanitarian corridors that only lead to Russia, or that have mines along the route and aren't genuine humanitarian corridors. We're calling out their action of bombing, the maternity hospital. We're calling out what the Putin regime is doing and how they're using a similar playbook to the playbook they used in Syria. So we are constantly working with our allies to be absolutely clear about what the truth is. And I pay tribute to the brave journalists in Ukraine who are helping us expose the absolutely appalling actions of the Russian government.
And you spoke to the ICC. Would you go so far as to say we're seeing war crimes, there are war crimes, because I think part of what we're talking about in this is chronicling those as sadly they happen?
Well, we are very clear that there is strong evidence that we are seeing war crimes taking place, and we need to take that evidence and record that evidence. We're working with our allies to do that. 38 countries referred the case to the ICC. We are working to collate the evidence on the ground of what is happening to make sure that Putin and his associates are held to account for these appalling actions.
On China, you called out China. Watching China right now, the 5,300-word statement on the eve of the Olympics between Putin and Xi said it was a relationship without limits. Obviously, President Xi must be looking at that differently, but on the other hand, what signs do you see? You said China should do more. What specifically would you call upon China to do? And so far as you're watching China, do you see them moving off of their support for Russia in any important manner?
Well, it was significant that China didn't vote with Russia at the UN Security Council. And judging from the statement we saw prior to the Olympic Games, I would question whether the whole truth was told to China about what was planned. And as opposed to Russia, who have said that Ukraine doesn't exist, China has confirmed Ukraine's sovereignty. And what we are saying to China is, as a country who claim that they believe in Ukraine's sovereignty, they need to stand with the international community in opposition to what Russia is doing. I mean, I talked in my speech about the company that Russia is in, including North Korea and other and Syria. Does China want to be in that company?
And are you seeing evidence that China is helping to support Russia counteract sanctions, for example? And what message would you have for China on that? Because that could be a crucial part of what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, my message to China is they should not be aiding and abetting this appalling invasion of a sovereign nation. And do they want the international reputation for doing that?
Putin has spoken. He's done some nuclear saber rattling. He's talked about chemical weapons. He's talked about how sanctions are an act of war. Are you concerned, or you think there's bluff to this? Are you concerned that he might broaden beyond the borders of Ukraine, not kinetically, but with cyber attacks, with other sorts of attacks, and how prepared should we be for that potential?
What is absolutely clear is that Putin's invasion is not going according to plan. He thought it would be much more straightforward. He didn't think the Ukrainians would mount the defense of their nation that they had. And as a result of his plan not working, he is resorting to rhetoric, to escalatory measures, to, I fear, using more and more barbaric techniques. And we will call him out for that, but we must be absolutely resolute in not taking our foot off the pedal at this stage, but instead remaining strong. Because as I said in my speech, that is what he understands. We must be stronger. We've been strong in our sanctions, but we must be stronger. We must be strong in supplying Ukraine with the weapons they need to defend their country.
And nuclear threat, you take seriously, don't take seriously?
Well, as I've said, he is using this rhetoric as a distraction from the fact that his invasion is not going according to plan.
Right.
And he is trying to move us off the focus on the appalling invasion that he's undertaken. And I don't think we should debate on his terms.
Thank you for that. I know you don't have much time, but let me close with a big, broad question. You talked about this as a paradigm shift. We at the Atlantic Council have used the language of inflection point, paradigm shift, historic moment, perhaps as important as the end of World War I, World War II. That then calls upon us to not just look at Ukraine as Ukraine, but something, and because you're talking about the end of complacency, it also suggests we've been complacent. What do we need to do beyond this? As NATO, as the UK, EU, US, as global allies, do you have any specific ideas that we're going to be working on this in the weeks and months ahead? Because as terrible as this crisis is, it's not the end of what we're facing, and that's what you so powerfully underscored in your speech. Do you have some ideas of how we should use this moment to build on this message of paradigm shift, to use it as a paradigm shift for how we also cooperate with each other, work with each other?
Well, I completely agree, and we need to rethink some of our assumptions about the way we've been operating, because we haven't. I talked about defense spending, I talked about deterrence, I talked about the global security architecture, about arms control. These are all key areas that we need to be thinking about what we do differently. And then the other area I'd point out is economic dependence. We've been through an era of globalization where we treated all the counterparties we're dealing with as equal. But it's very different being part of a trade relationship or an investment relationship with a like-minded ally that believes in sovereignty, territorial integrity, freedom and democracy, from being dependent on an authoritarian regime. So I think in terms of our economic relationships, we need to be much clearer about the values the countries we're dealing with have. And that era of values-free trade, of underspending on defense, I think are very, very clearly over, and we are in a new era. I mean, if you look at what Germany has done in completely rethinking its energy policy, its security policy within the space of about a week.
Breathtaking.
That is the rethinking we all need to be doing now.
And is this also a petri dish for the new UK-EU relationship? How have you been navigating this situation at this time, with sanctions playing such a crucial role?
Well, we're working very closely with our EU allies, with our NATO allies, and also more broadly with countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and others. And this is really about a network, a coalition of countries that believe in territorial integrity and sovereignty, and in playing by the rules. I think that's fundamentally important as well. And last week I attended the EU Foreign Affairs Council with Secretary Blinken, with Melanie Joly, the Foreign Minister of Canada. And we are all working extremely closely together because this has been a huge shock for Europe. We face a threat. We never thought we would see this type of war taking place in a European country. We thought those days were over, that we moved on, and I'm afraid we haven't moved on. So we are all, and this doesn't just apply to the politicians in the country, this is what our public feel like too. We feel a different level of concern about security from anything we felt like for the past, well, for my lifetime.
Madam Foreign Secretary, what a powerful message, what a powerful 2022 Makins Lecture, Christopher Makins Lecture. He would be so proud of you delivering this message at this forum today. Your quote, "How we respond today will set the pattern for this new era. We must rise to this moment. We must pledge that never again will we allow such aggression to go unchecked." The Atlantic Council's whole mission is shaping the global future together with allies and partners. There is no ally more important than the United Kingdom. Thank you so much for your lecture and for your message to this important audience.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.